Have you ever tried to compare like the environmental impact of a gas-powered car versus an electric one?
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like comparing apples and oranges, or maybe
Yeah.
like internal combustion engines and battery packs.
Yeah,
The point is, it's really hard to get a clear picture.
it is.
But that's where today's deep dive comes in.
Okay.
Carbon footprint databases.
Interesting.
We've got a fascinating document all about a competition in China to build one of these databases. And trust me, it's not just about numbers. We're talking about international relations, data security,
Oh, wow.
the whole shebang.
That's a lot more than I would have thought.
Yeah.
It's a really timely topic, I think. Because these databases are kind of becoming like the backbone of how we measure sustainability these days.
Yeah.
But it's not as simple as like one giant database for everything.
Okay, so break it down for me. What kinds of databases are we even talking about here?
Well, there are actually quite a few distinctions. Some databases focus purely on greenhouse gases. Those are your classic carbon footprint ones. Then you've got LCA databases, which is life cycle assessment, and they get into all sorts of environmental impacts.
Wow.
The EU system, for example, tracks 16 different categories.
16. That's intense.
It is.
So is it like each database is for a different thing, or?
It's more about levels of detail, too. Think of it like building a car. You've got databases for individual parts.
Yeah.
Those are what they call unit process data sets.
Okay.
But you also need the instructions to put it all together, right? Those are more like aggregated result data sets. They're showing the complete impact.
So one is like the ingredients list, and the
Yeah.
other one's the actual recipe for like environmental impact.
Exactly. And the source document actually makes this point.
Okay.
It says that you need both.
Yeah.
You can't just have like a pile of parts and understand the car as a whole.
Right. Makes sense. But then there's this other term that I saw in the document. It's basic databases. What makes them so basic?
Think of them as like the bedrock, the foundation for everything else. They contain data on the most fundamental processes. So like making steel, generating energy from coal, that kind of thing. Without these basic databases, any carbon footprint calculation you do is kind of built on shaky ground.
So they're like super detailed recipes for all the core ingredients,
Very much.
everything.
Pretty much. And what's wild is that there are only 4 of these foundational databases globally.
Right, seriously, only 4 for the entire world.
Yeah.
You'd think that something that important would have a little bit more redundancy, right?
It kind of speaks to the complexity and the sheer scale of the research involved. These databases require tracing back entire supply chains and figuring out the energy used and the emissions for every single step.
Yeah.
It's a monumental task.
Okay, so these basic databases aren't so basic after all.
Not really, no.
So tell me more about these heavy hitters, these global databases.
Sure, so we've got ecoinvent from Switzerland.
Okay.
We've got GABI, that one's from the US and Germany.
Yep.
IDEA from Japan.
Okay.
And then the CLCD, the China Life Cycle Database, which is the newest one. It was launched in 2010.
Okay, and that's the one at the heart of this Chinese competition, right?
It is, yeah.
So why is China going through all this effort to make their own database when these other big databases already exist?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The document highlights how GABI and ecoinvent have created what they call Chinese electricity models. But,
That doesn't catch.
yeah,
Okay.
these models might be using data that doesn't entirely reflect the reality of Chinese production.
Oh.
And there's this concern that EU regulations could end up relying on these potentially inaccurate models to calculate the carbon footprint of Chinese products.
So it's like judging someone based on outdated information. Not really a fair assessment, is it?
Not really.
Yeah.
And that's a big driving force behind this competition.
Yeah.
China wants to build this open and transparent database that uses data that's been collected and verified within their own borders.
Okay, now I'm starting to see why they're doing this. But building a database from scratch, that sounds like a massive undertaking. Where would they even begin?
Well, the document lays out a two-pronged approach.
Okay.
First, they're going to leverage this efootprint online system, and they're also going to use their existing CLCD database as a foundation. And then second, they're committed to making sure that all models are verifiable and transparent,
Okay.
so users can trace the data back to its source, which ensures accuracy and fights against any black box calculations that might obscure the true footprint.
So transparency seems to be like the name of the game here.
It really is.
But how does it actually work in practice? Can you walk me through it?
Sure. Let's take cement production, which the document uses as an example.
Okay.
It starts with meticulous data collection.
Okay.
They break down the entire process of making cement into tiny little steps, like quarrying limestone, transporting materials, grinding the cement. Each step is meticulously documented.
Wow, that sounds incredibly detailed.
It is.
Yeah.
Each step is analyzed for its energy consumption, its emissions, materials used, you name it.
Wow.
And then this very granular data gets fed into a platform like efootprint, and then it's linked to the CLCD database so they can have a more holistic picture of the entire production process.
So they're not just measuring the final product, they're looking at the entire journey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they need to do this for countless products and industries.
Wow.
It's a huge undertaking, but with potentially huge payoffs.
Okay, so I'm really starting to see the scale and the ambition behind this competition.
Yeah.
But is this all just about data and numbers? What's the real-world impact of all of this?
Well, this competition isn't just about building a database.
Right.
It's about giving China a seat at the table when it comes to global carbon accounting. They want to ensure that their products and industries are assessed fairly and accurately.
So it's about representation and having a voice in how sustainability is measured on this global stage.
Precisely. And this has implications that reach far beyond China. It could influence how other countries approach carbon footprint databases and really shape the future of international trade.
Now that's a game changer. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's bring it back to the individual. How does all of this impact the average person?
That's where things get really interesting. Well, imagine walking into a store and being able to instantly compare the carbon footprint of different products,
Okay.
like those apples and oranges you mentioned,
Yeah.
but with actual data.
Yeah. Yeah, so no more guessing games
Right.
or relying on, like, vague labels. You can actually make informed choices based on, like, hard numbers.
Exactly. And it's not just about consumers feeling good about their purchases, you know?
All right.
Businesses could use this data to pinpoint areas where they can reduce their environmental impact.
So there's, like, a potential economic incentive for businesses to kind of get on board, too.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the policymakers. Governments could use this data to shape policies that promote sustainability and help us reach those climate goals that everyone's always talking about.
Right. Okay, so it's like this ripple effect.
Yeah.
From individuals making informed choices to companies cleaning up their act to governments steering the ship in the right direction.
Exactly. And this Chinese competition really highlights the importance of global collaboration.
Yeah.
They're pushing for an open and transparent database that the whole world can benefit from.
Right. The document really emphasizes that this isn't about China going it alone.
All right.
This is about creating a resource for everybody.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that climate change is a global challenge.
Yeah,
And it demands a collective response.
for sure.
Having accurate and accessible data is essential for building trust and fostering cooperation between nations.
And it's also about making sure that countries like China have a voice
Yes.
in how sustainability is measured and evaluated on this global stage.
Right.
Precisely. It's about leveling the playing field and ensuring a more equitable system for assessing environmental impact.
Worldwide. Yeah. Okay, this is all incredibly exciting.
It is.
But I do have to ask, are there any downsides to this?
Oh, of course.
It can't all be sunshine and rainbows, right?
You're right. There are definitely challenges that we have to consider. Data collection and verification can be incredibly complex and time-consuming.
Yeah.
And there's always the risk of data being manipulated or misinterpreted.
Right. And what about the issue of standardization?
Yeah.
If every country is using different methods or data sources,
Okay.
how can we be sure that we're comparing apples to apples?
That's a crucial point. Developing common standards and protocols is going to be essential for ensuring that these databases are truly effective tools for global carbon accounting.
So it's not just about building databases, it's about building trust,
Right.
collaboration, and a shared understanding of how to use this data responsibly and effectively.
Exactly. And that's why initiatives like this Chinese competition are so important.
Yeah. They're not just about crunching numbers.
Yeah.
They're about sparking dialogue and finding common ground on this very critical issue.
It's about realizing that we're all in this together and we need to work together to find solutions.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've talked about the benefits, the challenges, the global implications.
We have.
But let's take a step back for a second and consider the bigger picture. What are the long-term consequences of this shift towards more comprehensive carbon footprint analysis?
That's where things get really thought-provoking.
Okay.
Imagine a world where carbon footprint data is readily available and integrated into every aspect of our lives.
Okay.
From what we buy at the grocery store, to how companies invest their money, to how governments craft policies.
That's like looking at the world through this new lens.
Yes.
One that brings sustainability into really sharp focus.
Exactly. Sustainability could become a core value that drives decision-making at every level.
But couldn't that also create new points of tension?
It could.
If carbon footprint becomes a key metric for evaluating everything, wouldn't that lead to increased competition and potentially even conflict?
That's a valid concern. Greater transparency could definitely create some friction.
Yeah.
But it could also be a catalyst for innovation and collaboration.
Okay.
As companies and countries strive to improve their environmental performance.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
In a way, yes, it has the potential to drive positive change, but it also comes with risks and challenges that we need to be mindful of.
That's why it's so important to have these conversations.
It is.
To really grapple with the complexities and the nuances of this issue.
For sure.
And work together to find solutions that are both effective and equitable.
I couldn't agree more.
All right, before we wrap things up, let's zoom back in on that Chinese competition.
Okay.
And their focus on transparency and verifiability.
Right.
What does that look like on a practical level?
Well, the document stresses the importance of traceability.
Okay.
Every single data point in the database should be linked back to its original source.
So it's like a paper trail, but for data?
It's exactly. Whether it's a scientific study, a government report, or internal company data.
Okay.
Users should be able to follow the data back to its roots.
So it's about creating a system of accountability.
It is.
Knowing where the data comes from and being able to verify its authenticity.
Precisely. And it's not just about tracing the data.
Right.
It's about making the methodology transparent as well.
Okay.
How are the calculations being done?
Yeah.
What assumptions are being made?
Right.
This information should be readily available and easy to understand.
So it's about demystifying the process.
Yeah.
And empowering anyone to understand how these carbon footprints are being calculated.
Exactly. Transparency is the key to building trust and ensuring that these databases are used responsibly and ethically.
You know, I have to admit, I came into this thinking carbon footprint databases were just about numbers and calculations.
Right.
But it's so much bigger than that.
It really is.
It's about transparency, accountability, collaboration.
Right.
Ultimately, it's about empowering people to make more informed decisions about the impact of their choices.
Well said.
It's a crucial piece of the puzzle
It is.
when it comes to building a more sustainable future.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Okay, before we get too philosophical,
Right.
let's bring it back down to earth for a moment. What can our listeners do if they want to learn more or even get involved?
Sure.
The document mentions some resources, right?
Yes, there are several links in the document that will lead you to more information about the Chinese competition,
Okay.
the eFootprint system, and the CLCD database.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to include those links in the show notes for anyone who wants to explore further.
Excellent.
Okay, so I think we've covered just about everything.
Indeed we have. It's been a fascinating discussion.
And I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a much larger conversation
I think so too.
as the world continues to grapple with climate change.
Right.
And the need for sustainable practices, carbon footprint databases are only going to become more important.
I absolutely agree.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question to ponder.
Okay.
How do you think the development of comprehensive and reliable carbon footprint databases will shape the future of consumer choices, business practices, and international trade?
Yeah.
Will greater transparency lead to more sustainable outcomes, or will it create new points of contention?
That's a good question.
These are complex questions with no easy answers, but they're questions worth wrestling with as we navigate the uncharted waters of a more sustainable future.
That's an excellent point to leave our listeners with.
The journey towards a more sustainable future starts with awareness.
Right.
And that's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive.
Well said. And speaking of awareness, I think it's time for that final brain tickle moment, something to really get our listeners thinking.
Okay, hit me.
We've talked a lot about how these databases can help us make more informed choices.
Right.
But what if we took it a step further?
Okay, I'm listening.
What if instead of just focusing on the carbon footprint, we expanded these databases to encompass the social impact of products as well?
Hold on. You're blowing my mind a little bit.
It's a big idea.
You mean like fair labor practices, ethical sourcing, community impact, that kind of thing?
Precisely.
Wow.
Imagine a database that gives you like a holistic view of a product's impact, not just environmental, but social as well.
That would be revolutionary.
It would.
It would completely change how we evaluate our choices as consumers.
Right.
No more turning a blind eye to the human cost of what we buy.
Exactly. It could usher in a whole new era of conscious consumerism,
Yeah.
where we prioritize products that are both good for the planet
Yeah.
and good for people.
Wow, that's a powerful thought to end on.
It is.
Taking this whole idea of transparency and accountability to a whole new level.
It's a vision we're striving for.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I think we've officially reached the bottom of this deep dive.
I think so.
We've explored the fascinating world of carbon footprint databases, from the nitty-gritty details of data collection to the broader implications for global sustainability trade and even our own values as consumers.
It's been a pleasure joining you on this journey.
And a huge thank you to all of you for listening.
Yes, thank you.
Remember, the quest for a more sustainable future begins with awareness, and hopefully this deep dive has sparked a few new ideas and inspired you to look at the world through a slightly different lens.
I hope so too.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the world around you. And who knows, maybe one of you listening will be the one to develop that groundbreaking database that encompasses both the environmental and the social impact of our choices.
Oh, that would be something to see.
Until then, stay curious, deep diver seizes.